All right, so we're gonna do a little bit of practicing for shading because you're gonna end up shading your entire animal that you are drawing. So a lot of people shade kind of like this, and there's several problems with that. So you get little white gaps in there that even if you try to blend it like this, you still get areas that are lighter and darker, and that's not really what we want. We want a nice smooth surface. Some people also shade like this, and that kind of gives you the same problem. If you look at that, there's still a lot of white gaps in there, so you really don't want either of those. You want something that's kind of in the middle, so something that is kind of like this is what I usually do. So it's kind of a circular motion, but it's more of an oval than a circle. And I'm kind of going over, I'm trying not to go over any area too much because we don't want it to be a lot darker. And you will also notice that the slower you go, the better control you have of how light or dark it is. If you go really fast like this, you're pretty much going to get dark all the time. Whereas if you can go nice and slow like this, then you can go really dark if you want to, or really light if you want to. You can kind of decide how light or dark you want it to be. So what you want is something like this. So that's pretty smooth. We don't see any major white gaps. So for your shading practice on the back of your animal drawing, I want you to practice shading like this, so in nice little ovals, but I want you to practice it from dark to light. So I want a line, basically, or kind of like a little rectangle on the back of your animal drawing where you start down here, shading really, really dark. So pushing really, really hard down here. And then as you go, kind of very, very slightly lightening it up. And if you're just looking at this, it probably doesn't even look like this is much lighter than this, but that's the goal. You want to slowly. I don't want to see just two shades in your artwork. I don't want to see dark and light. I want to see a whole range. This is called a value range. So I want to see a whole range of dark and light with a lot of sort of medium in there. So you can go like this and just every time you go over a row, just kind of very, very lightly changing the value. So by the time you get over here, you should have something that's just barely even there. Something like that. So there is my value scale. It starts off dark and it slowly transitions into light. So I want you to do that on the back of your animal drawing. You will also submit a photo of this so that I know you have done it to the shading practice assignment on Google Classroom. Now, before you start shading your drawing, however, I want you to keep some things in mind. So I want you to look at what the actual shade of the animal is. By now you should have converted your photo to black and white. So I want you to compare directly. Don't just go in and shade everything a medium gray. Really look at which parts of the animal are darkest and lightest and try to match those using this value scale. You have a whole range of value to work with here. So really try to match those values accurately. That's one of the things that you're being graded on for this project is how accurately you match the value. Another thing I want you to keep in mind is the smoothness of your shading. You really don't want to do something like this or this. You want to do something like this. Now, if you're doing a furry animal, if you want to go back over top of it after you've shaded kind of a base layer and like put some little marks to make fur, you can do that, but this is not going to look like fur. This is going to look like scribbles. You want to do something nice and solid, and then you can put some texture on top of it if you want to. You may blend this if you want to. I do prefer that you don't blend with your finger because your finger gets oil on the paper, and that's not ideal. You can blend with a tissue, or if you have a blending stump or something like that, you can. Usually a tissue or a paper towel works fine, a little scrap of toilet paper, something like that. But you don't want to over blend. You don't want to do something like this where it's just smudged all outside the area that you're working on. If you're blending like this area, you want to confine it to this area, not like huge blending, just like a little bit at a time. I always say that blending adds about 2% to your drawing. People think that they can shade like this and then just blend and it's gonna be fine. It adds about 2%. So if you were gonna make, I don't know, maybe a 95 on the project and then you go back and blend, maybe you bump yourself to a 97. But if you were gonna make a 73 on the project, you blend and you bump yourself to a 75. It's probably not gonna make that much of a difference in your grade. It will like make those final little touches, but it's not going to save you. So don't blend or don't shade sloppy and then rely on blending to save you. When you are done with this and you have uploaded your picture, you can start shading your animal. Again, making sure to be aware of where the dark areas, the medium areas, the light areas are, matching those as closely as possible. The entire time you're working, you should be referencing your iPad multiple times as you look at the photo and then look at your drawing. Look at the photo, look at your drawing. At least every 5 minutes. Most kids prefer just to have it pulled up on their iPad and leave their iPad on and maybe plugged in if it needs to be, and reference it constantly, like 2 or 3 times a minute. That will be my preference. If your battery is low and you can only check it every 5 minutes or so, that's fine. That's, if that's what you need to do, that's okay. Just keep in mind as you blend, so like, let's imagine I've got my grid line here. If I have blended over my grid line or shaded over my grid line, and I go back and try to erase my grid line, I erase my shading as well. So if you're getting to a part, if you're about to shade right here, erase your grid line first and then do your shading. Remember, by the end of the project, your grid lines should be gone. So before you start shading is when you need to remove the grid lines. Don't try to remove the grid lines after you shade or you're gonna end up with something like this.